Okay, let's jump right into this. How exactly do you effectively share what's on your mind, your actual thoughts and reactions, when you're speaking in English?
Right.
We're not just talking about stating facts here. It's about expressing those personal viewpoints, those feelings, the ideas you hold.
Yeah, the subjective stuff.
Exactly. It sounds like a basic, fundamental piece of communication, doesn't it? But as we're about to find out from the source material we're diving into today, there's a whole lot more nuance to it than just adding "I think" to the beginning of every sentence.
That's exactly it. And the source material guiding this deep dive is incredibly specific. We're working with excerpts from a document called day7.pdf,
Ah, right.
which is presented as part of a larger English learning resource called 30 Days to Fluent English. This particular section, Day 7, is explicitly focused on expressing your opinions in English.
Okay, so our mission in this deep dive, and we're drawing only from the insights and examples presented in this day7.pdf source, is to really unpack the strategies, the specific phrases, and the underlying principles that it recommends. We don't just want to list the phrases. We want to understand why this source suggests these alternatives, how they are intended to function in conversation, and what the source implies is truly key to sounding not just grammatically correct, but genuinely confident and natural when you're sharing your view or agreeing or even navigating those moments where you need to, well, disagree politely.
And for you, the listener, engaging with this particular source material through our deep dive offers a very concrete benefit. I mean, if you've ever felt repetitive, maybe a bit stuck using the same simple phrases over and over.
Like, I think, I think, I think.
Exactly. Or maybe you're unsure how to voice a differing opinion without, sounding rude or too blunt.
Hmm.
Analyzing the specific techniques presented in this source can give you a really practical roadmap. It promises that mastering these specific phrases and approaches can help you sound more fluent, more confident, and more natural in your English conversations. Our analysis is designed to give you the why and the how behind the source's recommendations, making them hopefully easier to understand and apply.
Absolutely. So we're going to follow the structure laid out in the source material itself. Makes sense. We'll start by looking at how it suggests you can confidently give your own opinion using a variety of phrases beyond just, I think.
Right. Step 1.
Then we'll explore its guidance on agreeing with others in a way that feels natural and engaging. From there, we'll tackle the crucial topic of disagreeing, focusing on the source's approach to doing so politely and respectfully. That's a big one.
Yeah.
Finally, we'll look at the source's tips for adding personality and making your opinions more engaging in general. Sort of the icing on the cake.
Sounds like a plan. Let's delve into what the source actually presents as these key techniques for expressing your thoughts.
All right, so the source starts right off the bat by addressing a common habit among English learners, relying heavily on I think.
Yeah, the default phrase.
It explicitly states that while I think is perfectly acceptable and, everyone understands it, it can become repetitive. The source positions it as a basic phrase and suggests that using alternatives is the key to sounding more natural and fluent.
This is a really interesting starting point for the source, isn't it? It doesn't label I think as wrong,
No, not at all.
but rather as maybe a missed opportunity for variety and potentially for nuance. And it immediately provides a list of alternative phrases it recommends learners adopt. These are, in my opinion, personally, I believe,
Right.
in my perspective, I'd say that. And as far as
Sure.
I'm concerned,
Okay, looking at this list, you can immediately see a pattern the source is promoting, right? All these phrases explicitly label the statement that follows as your personal view. In my opinion, is probably the most direct way to do this. Straightforward.
yeah, very clear.
But what about, from my perspective? The source lists it as an alternative to I think, but it feels like it carries a bit more weight, doesn't it? It sounds a little different.
It does, yeah. Even though the source doesn't dive deep into all the subtle linguistic nuances, the phrase itself, from my perspective, inherently implies that you're viewing the topic from a specific angle or through your own particular lens.
Right, like acknowledging your viewpoint isn't the only viewpoint.
Exactly. By using it, you subtly acknowledge that there might be other ways to look at the issue, other valid perspectives out there. It adds a layer of, intellectual humility, perhaps, while still clearly owning your viewpoint. It's not just, here's a thought. It's more like, here's how I see it from where I stand.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It frames the opinion as one view among potentially many. So what about personally, I believe? How does that feel different from, in my opinion, or just plain I think?
Well, the addition of personally really emphasizes that this is your individual conviction. It might be distinct from a widely held view or, just a factual statement. It signals this is your take. And believe often suggests a stronger level of conviction or maybe deeper consideration than simply think. So, personally, I believe can make your opinion sound more deeply held or considered. It adds to that sense of confidence the source talks about.
So you're not just tossing out an idea casually.
Right. You're stating something you genuinely hold to be true for yourself.
Yeah.
It carries more personal weight.
I see. Okay. And I'd say that. That one sounds quite different from the others. It feels a bit softer.
Yes, definitely. I'd say that. Feels much more casual and perhaps less formal or assertive than, say, in my opinion, or personally, I believe.
Yeah.
It's a very common, very natural way to introduce an opinion, almost like you're offering a conclusion or maybe a gentle suggestion based on the context of the conversation.
Right.
Think of it as a softer way to put your idea forward, perhaps when you're less certain or in a more relaxed setting. It doesn't carry the same sort of formal declaration feels as, in my opinion.
It definitely flows more easily in a quick back and forth, less clunky. And finally, as far as I'm concerned, the source uses this one in a specific example about remote work, right? Noting that its suitability depends on the person's job and lifestyle. What does that specific phrase add? What's its function?
As far as I'm concerned, is particularly useful for defining the scope or the limits of your opinion. It signals that your view is based on your frame of reference, your knowledge, or what matters to you personally within certain boundaries. So in that remote work example provided by the source, saying, as far as I'm concerned, it's a great option, but it depends, implies that the opinion is being given from a practical individual standpoint. It considers factors like job and lifestyle that are of concern to the person involved. It sort of fences off your opinion to a specific context.
Like saying, based on what's relevant to me, or looking at it from this particular angle.
Exactly. Or from my perspective on this specific aspect, it sets a boundary around your statement.
That's a really helpful distinction. So the source isn't just giving us synonyms for I think, it's giving us phrases that add different shades of meaning. Formality, conviction, humility, or scope.
Precisely.
Let's take the source's core example for expressing an opinion, the topic of remote work. The basic phrase it contrasts with the alternatives is simply stating, I think it's great. Very basic.
Right. Simple, clear, but maybe lacks depth.
Yeah.
Now let's look at the first alternative example the source provides using one of the new phrases. Personally, I believe remote work is fantastic because it gives people more flexibility.
Okay, let's really unpack that structure, strictly based on how the source presents it. It starts with the opinion phrase, personally, I believe, then states the opinion, remote work is fantastic. But crucially, the source adds a reason, because it gives people more flexibility.
Yeah, that because is key.
It implies very strongly that for the source, a confident and well-expressed opinion isn't just the introductory phrase and the core idea. It also often includes why you hold that opinion, the justification.
Exactly. The source shows us that providing justification or some kind of elaboration is a key component of sounding confident and natural. It's not just declaring your stance, it's backing it up, even if it's just briefly.
Okay, and the second example the source gives is, as far as I'm concerned, it's a great option, but it depends on the person's job and lifestyle. This one is even more complex and interesting, I think. It uses that scoping phrase we just talked about, as far as I'm concerned, states an opinion. It's a great option, but immediately introduces a condition or a nuance using but it depends on the person's job and lifestyle.
This example is vital because it teaches us something important based on the source's view. Expressing a confident opinion doesn't always mean having a simple black and white stance.
Right, it's not about being dogmatic.
Not at all. You can express a complex, conditional, or nuanced opinion and still sound confident precisely because you are articulating those conditions or limitations clearly. And that phrase, as far as I'm concerned, actually helps set up that conditionality. It's like saying, this is true for me, given these particular considerations.
That's a powerful insight from the source, yeah. Confidence comes from clear expression of thought, whether that thought is simple or complex. Let's try generating a few more hypothetical examples, following the source's structure phrase, plus opinion, plus reason, condition, detail, just to see how these phrases work in different contexts, sticking closely to the source's approach. Imagine the topic is the importance of learning new skills. Instead of just, I think learning skills is good, how could we apply these?
Okay, good one. Using in my opinion, continuous learning is essential for staying relevant in today's job market.
Okay, phrase plus opinion.
Because technology is changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
And there's the reason. Direct phrase, clear opinion, logical justification fits the pattern.
Good. Or with personally, I believe. Personally, I believe learning a musical instrument is incredibly rewarding,
Okay.
not just for the skill development itself, but also for emotional expression. So phrase, opinion, and multiple reasons or benefits. The source's pattern holds up again.
How about from my perspective?
Yeah.
On a topic like, say, city living versus country living, something people often have opinions on.
Sure.
From my perspective, city living offers unparalleled cultural experiences, although it can be quite expensive. So you have the phrase, the opinion, cultural experiences, and then a balancing condition introduced by although, which functions similarly to the source's use of but.
Right. Acknowledging a downside or a related factor. And using, I'd say that, on something lighter, maybe like trying new foods when traveling.
Good idea. I'd say that trying local street food is the best way to experience a new culture, even if you're a little nervous about it at first.
Okay, so phrase, opinion, and a slight acknowledgement of a potential drawback or counter feeling, even if you're nervous, still fits.
And for, as far as I'm concerned,
Mm.
perhaps on the topic of exercise routines, as far as I'm concerned, the best exercise routine is the one you actually enjoy and can stick with consistently,
Right.
rather than just following some trend you actually hate. Here, the phrase scopes the opinion to what's practically important for the individual enjoyment and consistency, followed by that conditional advice.
These examples, building directly on the patterns shown in the source's own examples, really underscore how these alternative phrases, when combined with elaboration or justification, allow for much richer and more precise expression of your thoughts compared to just falling back on, I think, all the time.
Absolutely. And the source makes a point of mentioning practice. Specifically, repetition. It says, repetition is the way to make these phrases feel natural.
Right.
It really highlights the source's pedagogical approach. This is presented as a skill to be drilled and internalized through practice, not just, information to passively absorb.
Right. So that covers how the source advises you to give your own opinion with confidence and nuance. But what about when someone else expresses their opinion? The conversation continues. The source tackles agreeing next.
And just like with I think, the source suggests that simply saying I agree is, well, basic and potentially less engaging in a real conversation.
Yeah, it can feel a bit like a conversation stopper sometimes, can it? I agree. Full stop. The goal, according to the source, is to make your agreement more natural and engaging, presumably to keep the conversation flowing smoothly and show genuine interest beyond just a simple nod or affirmation.
Right, showing you're really listening and connecting.
And it provides another left of specific phrases for this purpose. I completely agree with you. That's a great point. I couldn't agree more. You're absolutely right. Exactly. That's what I was thinking.
It's another toolkit. And this list gives us different ways to express agreement. And they do have subtle differences in tone and focus, even if the source doesn't break down every single nuance explicitly for the learner.
So let's try to unpack them a bit based on common usage. I completely agree with you, and I couldn't agree more. These sound like very strong agreement.
They are. Both express strong, full agreement. I couldn't agree more is a common idiom, right? It means you agree to the maximum possible extent. It's impossible for you to agree more than you currently do. Very emphatic.
Okay, so those signal really strong alignment. What about, that's a great point, and you're absolutely right. How do they differ slightly?
Well, that's a great point. Specifically validates the quality or the insightfulness of the other person's idea or argument. It's like you're praising their thinking process or the specific argument they just made.
So focusing on the idea.
Yeah. Whereas you're absolutely right, on the other hand, is a more direct validation of the other person's correctness or truthfulness. It affirms them as being correct in their statement. Both are strong agreement, but one focuses more on the point itself, the other on the person being right. Subtly different emphasis.
Interesting. And exactly, that's what I was thinking. Feels quite different again. More personal, maybe.
It does, exactly. On its own is a strong affirmation of correctness, similar to you're absolutely right. But pairing it with, that's what I was thinking, adds this layer of shared experience or like anticipation.
Mind reading.
Almost. It makes the agreement feel very natural, like you were both on the same wavelength or had arrived at the same conclusion independently. It definitely creates a sense of connection, which reinforces the source's aim for phrases that are engaging.
That shared thinking element definitely adds a layer of conversational warmth, doesn't it? It's more than just agreeing, it's connecting. Let's look at a sort of example for agreement. Someone says exercise is really important for mental health. A pretty common sentiment.
Right. And the basic response, the one the source wants us to move beyond, is just, I agree.
Flat. So the source then shows alternatives that add more substance and engagement. The first one is, you're absolutely right. Exercise helps reduce stress and keeps you energized.
Okay, so following the source's structure here, you've got the agreement phrase, you're absolutely right, followed by adding a supporting detail or elaboration that expands on why the initial statement is right. Exercise helps reduce stress and keeps you energized.
So it mirrors the pattern for giving opinions we just discussed. Agreement isn't just affirmation. According to the source, it's often coupled with additional information or explanation. You build on their point.
Exactly. The source teaches that natural, engaging agreement often involves contributing more to the conversation, building upon the initial point rather than just echoing it. The second example from the source is, that's a great point. I always feel better after a workout.
Okay, different pattern here. The structure is agreement phrase. That's a great point. Plus adding a personal anecdote or experience. I always feel better after a workout. So this is another method the source highlights for making agreement natural and engaging, connecting the shared idea to your own life or your own observations. Makes it more relatable.
These examples really show that the source is suggesting that agreeing effectively involves more than just signaling assent. It's about actively participating by providing supporting info, elaboration, or a personal connection. Let's try generating more examples based on this approach, applying these phrases and adding detail, anecdotes, or elaboration, just like the source models for us.
Okay, good idea. Let's say someone says, learning a new language opens up so many opportunities. How could we agree using the source's techniques?
All right, using I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. It opens doors not just to travel and appreciating different cultures, but also potentially to entirely new career paths you hadn't even considered before. So strong agreement plus elaboration on the types of opportunities.
Nice. Or with exactly, that's what I was thinking. Exactly, that's what I was thinking. My cousin learned Spanish, right? And it completely changed her travel experiences in South America. She said she could connect with locals on a totally different level. Shared thought plus a specific, brief, relatable anecdote. Makes it vivid.
Okay, another one. If someone says, trying to be perfect all the time can actually hold you back.
That's a good one. You could use, that's a great point. That's a great point. Sometimes the fear of making even a small mistake completely stops you from starting something new at all. So validating the point and adding a brief elaboration on the consequence, the mechanism.
Or using, I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. Focusing way too much on perfectionism often just leads to procrastination and a whole lot of unnecessary stress.
Yes.
Strong agreement followed by explaining the negative effects, adding that detail.
These expanded responses, built using the source's examples as models, definitely make the conversation feel much richer than a simple, yep, I agree. You're showing how you agree and actually adding value to the exchange.
In the source, yet again, what does it stress? Repetition. The importance of repetition for practicing these phrases. It's a very consistent theme in its pedagogical approach for building fluency and naturalness.
Right. Practice makes perfect, or at least more natural. Okay, so giving opinions and agreeing are covered. But conversation isn't always about happy alignment, is it? Sometimes opinions diverge. The source moves on to address how to handle disagreement. This feels crucial.
Yeah, and the source is very practical here. It acknowledges up front that sometimes you won't agree, and that's okay. It normalizes disagreement as just a natural part of human conversation.
Which is important, takes the pressure off a bit.
It does. However, it immediately emphasizes that the crucial element is doing it in a polite and respectful way. This tells us the source really prioritizes the social aspect of communication, the interpersonal dynamics, alongside just the linguistic correctness. It's about how you say it.
And this focus on politeness is immediately evident in the list of phrases the source provides for disagreement. I mean, the common thread is incredibly strong and really highlights the source's core strategy for polite disagreement. I see your point, but I get what you're saying, but I feel differently. That's an interesting perspective, but I think I respect your opinion, but I have a different view. I get where you're coming from, but I see it differently.
Yes, the pattern is undeniable, isn't it? Every single one of these phrases starts by acknowledging the other person's viewpoint or their right to hold it before introducing the disagreement.
Hmm.
And that disagreement is always signaled by but.
That initial acknowledgement seems key.
It's the primary softening technique the source teaches. It shows you've listened, you've processed their idea, even if you don't ultimately share it. It maintains respect right from the start.
Okay, let's look closer at those initial acknowledgement phrases. I see your point, but, and I get what you're saying, but, and I get where you're coming from, but. They seem very similar in function. They all convey comprehension, right?
They are very similar. I get where you're coming from is perhaps slightly more idiomatic and informal, maybe, than I see your point or I get what you're saying, which are quite direct statements of understanding. But their function in this structure, according to the source's examples, is exactly the same. Signal that you've heard and understood their position before you state your own different view.
Okay. And that's an interesting perspective, but I think, how does calling it an interesting perspective work as a softening technique? That sounds a bit, I don't know, potentially dismissive if used wrongly.
It could be, but used genuinely, it's quite sophisticated. By labeling the other person's view as an interesting perspective, you acknowledge it as a valid way of looking at the issue, perhaps even one you hadn't fully considered before.
Okay.
It frames the subsequent disagreement not as a direct refutation of their truth, but simply as you presenting another perspective. It subtly shifts the conversation towards exploring different viewpoints, rather than a direct confrontation where one person has to be right and the other wrong.
That's actually a very clever way to manage potential conflict. Framing it as a difference in viewing angles, rather than someone making an error. I like that. And I respect your opinion, but I have a different view. That one seems very direct about the politeness aspect.
It's the most explicit, yeah. By saying, I respect your opinion, you are directly affirming the other person's right to their thoughts, regardless of whether you agree with the content of that thought. It clearly separates the person and their right to an opinion from the opinion itself.
Right.
It's a very clear signal that the disagreement coming up is about the idea, not about disrespecting the person holding it. Very clear boundary.
Okay, so the source provides a range of ways to perform that crucial first step. The acknowledgement and softening before the but pivots to your differing view. Let's look at the source's main example for disagreement. Someone says, I think social media is bad for society. A strong, potentially controversial statement.
Yeah, definitely one that invites disagreement. A blunt, I disagree, or no, it's not, could easily shut down the conversation or feel overly confrontational.
Right. So the source offers alternatives using its softening structure. First example. I see your point, but I think social media has some benefits too, like keeping people connected.
Okay, let's analyze this structure based on the source's presentation again. You have the softening acknowledgement, I see your point, then the but, signaling the turn, then the differing view, I think social media has some benefits too, and crucially, a specific example supporting the differing view, like keeping people connected.
So just like with giving opinions and agreeing, the source demonstrates that a good, polite disagreement response often involves more than just stating the core disagreement. It includes backing up your alternative view with some detail or reason.
Precisely. You're not just saying you're wrong. You're saying, well, I see it differently, and here's a reason or example why my view is also valid. It invites further discussion. The second example from the source is, that's an interesting perspective, but I actually think it depends on how people use it.
This one uses the interesting perspective acknowledgement, which we just discussed, and then it introduces a nuanced counterpoint. It depends on how people use it, rather than a direct opposite view, like, no, it's good.
Right.
It suggests the truth isn't black and white, but conditional or complex. And the word actually adds a subtle emphasis, doesn't it? It suggests the speaker's genuine alternative thought, perhaps contrasting with the initial statement.
Yeah, actually does add that little bit of emphasis. These examples clearly show the source's core formula for polite disagreement. Acknowledge plus, but plus your supported nuance, different view. That structure is presented as key to disagreeing politely while still contributing your own valuable ideas to the conversation.
Okay, let's generate several more examples, strictly following the source's pattern on different debatable topics. How about this? The best way to relax is watching TV. Someone asserts that.
Okay. Using, I get where you're coming from. I get where you're coming from. Watching TV can be relaxing sometimes, definitely zone out a bit.
Acknowledging the kernel of truth.
But I feel differently because I find active things like going for a walk or maybe reading a book more restorative for my mind in the long run. So acknowledging their point, using the phrase, stating your different feeling, and providing reasons, active restorative.
Good. Or using, I respect your opinion, watching TV is popular, but I have a different view. I think true relaxation, for me anyway, comes from disconnecting from screens entirely, which TV obviously doesn't allow. Respectful phrase states a different view and gives a reason related to the nature of the activity, screens.
Okay, another topic. Remote work makes people less productive. A common debate.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective, but I think that's an interesting perspective, and I can see why some might think that, but I think it really varies wildly by individual and also the type of job. Some people are actually more productive at home without all the office distractions. Acknowledging the perspective, using the phrase, offering a nuanced counterpoint, it varies, and giving a reason, fewer distractions for some.
Or using, I see your point, but I see your point, and for some roles, maybe collaboration is a bit harder remotely, but I think overall productivity can stay high or even increase if teams have the right tools and, communicate really effectively. Acknowledging a potentially valid specific point from the other side, using the phrase, stating a different overall view, and adding conditions for why that view holds true. Right tools, effective communication.
These examples really hammer home the source's method for polite disagreement. Start by showing you've heard them, use but to pivot gracefully, and then state your position, ideally with some kind of support or nuance to back it up. It's a very clear recipe.
And no surprise here, the source continues to recommend repetition for practicing these polite disagreement techniques, reinforcing again that this is a skill built through consistent application and making it automatic.
Right, so it becomes second nature. Okay, so the source covers giving opinions, agreeing and disagreeing politely. What's left? It seems to move on to something less about the core structure of the statement and more about the delivery and the connection you make, making your opinions more engaging, adding some flair.
Exactly. This is where the source introduces the idea that, quote, native speakers don't just state their opinion, they add personality to it. This shifts the focus from just being clear and polite, which is essential, to also being interesting and relatable as a speaker.
Okay, and it breaks this down into a couple of main ways. First, using specific expressions to introduce your thoughts naturally. The phrases it lists here are, honestly, I think, to be fair, I'd say, and if you ask me.
These phrases act like little conversational warm-ups before you state the actual opinion.
Honestly, I think.
Often signals that you're about to give your genuine, perhaps candid or slightly surprising opinion. It adds that touch of sincerity or frankness.
Yeah, like, okay, here's what I really think. And to be fair, I'd say. That one often comes before a balanced opinion, right? Or maybe one that acknowledges a counter-argument before stating your main point.
That's right. It's often a way of saying, okay, considering the other side of things or being reasonable about this before stating your view, especially if your view might be a bit critical or conditional. The source implies this balancing function just by including it in this category of natural introductions.
Okay. And if you ask me, that's super common, isn't it? Very informal.
Very common. It clearly marks the statement as your personal opinion, but in a gentle, almost casual way. It's like you're responding to an implied request for your viewpoint, like, well, since you didn't ask, but if you had asked, here's my take. Softens it a bit while making it clearly personal.
So these phrases don't change the opinion itself, but they subtly change how it's introduced and how it might be perceived, signaling things like sincerity, balance, or casualness. Then the second category the source discusses for adding personality is adding a little emotion or humor.
Yes, and this is where the source gets really illustrative with its examples. The first one is that now famous line, at least for us today. I'd say pineapple on pizza is a crime, but that's just me.
Huh. That example is perfect for demonstrating how the source suggests adding personality. It uses of obvious hyperbole, calling pineapple on pizza a crime is a clear exaggeration just for humorous effect. Nobody actually thinks it's a criminal offense, hopefully.
Hopefully not.
And it's immediately softened by that tag at the end. But that's just me. This little tag makes it clear it's a strong, personal, maybe slightly quirky feeling, not intended as a serious judgment on others. That adds relatability and humor.
It really shows that personality can come from using strong, even exaggerated language, as long as it's used playfully and maybe mitigated with a self-deprecating phrase like, but that's just me. The second example the source gives is, honestly, I'd rather wake up at 5 a.m. than sit in traffic for 2 hours.
Ugh, another great one. This example combines one of those natural introduction phrases, honestly, with a highly relatable scenario that evokes a strong, common emotion, the absolute dread of sitting in traffic.
We've all been there.
And the surprising preference for something difficult, like waking up super early, highlights that feeling intensely. It uses that strong comparison to add intensity and personality. It resonates.
These examples demonstrate that adding personality, according to the source material, can involve using evocative language, maybe hyperbole, relatable comparisons, or showing genuine feeling. And often these are combined with those softening or introductory phrases we talked about. Let's try to generate a few more examples, trying to blend these techniques based on the source's approach.
Okay, let's try. Imagine the topic is attending really long, boring meetings, a classic workplace complaint.
Oh, perfect. Okay, using honestly, I think about half of our meetings could probably just be an email. My brain just completely switches off after the 30-minute mark. Yeah, that works. Combines the intro phrase, honestly, with a common, slightly humorous sentiment, could be an email, and a relatable personal reaction. Brain switches off. Expressing that genuine feeling based on the source's examples. Very relatable.
Okay, how about using, to be fair, I'd say, with a slightly balanced but still opinionated take on trying new technology, maybe something challenging.
All right. To be fair, I'd say adapting to really new, complex tech feels like trying to learn a completely foreign language sometimes.
Best comparison.
But the payoff in efficiency down the line is usually worth the initial struggle. Uses to be fair for that balance, a relatable comparison, learning a foreign language, to express the feeling of difficulty, followed by stating the positive condition or outcome.
And let's lean into the hyperbole and relatable struggle, like the source's pineapple pizza example. Instead of just saying it's hard to wake up early, you could exaggerate for effect. Okay. Waking up before the sun even thinks about rising feels like a personal attack, honestly. My bed has, like, magnetic powers. Combines hyperbole, personal attack, magnetic powers with the honestly intro phrase to express a strong, relatable feeling in an engaging, slightly humorous way.
Or using a relatable metaphor for difficulty, maybe for a common frustrating task.
Mm-hmm.
To be fair, trying to assemble flat-pack furniture with those famously unclear instructions feels like competing in some kind of Olympic sport of pure frustration.
Ah, yes.
But finally getting it standing upright is incredibly satisfying. Uses to be fair for a slightly humorous take, taps into a very relatable scenario, furniture assembly, uses a metaphor, Olympic sport, to convey intense emotion, frustration, and then ends with the positive outcome. These all seem to follow the source's pattern of using strong, often exaggerated or comparative language, maybe softened by context or introductory phrases, to inject that personality.
And let me guess, the source circles back again to emphasizing practice.
You got it. Repetition for practicing these engaging phrases too, making them sound natural and adding interest and color to your speech.
It's a very consistent message. Okay, so we've walked through the source's key sections now. How to give opinions with variety and support, how to agree engagingly, how to disagree politely using that specific structure, and finally, how to add personality to make your opinions more natural and interesting. As we wrap up the analysis of these core lessons from the source, it's worth noting how the source material actually concludes its Day 7 section.
Yeah, it doesn't just stop after the examples. It provides a very clear recap, explicitly listing the key phrases it taught across those different functions, expressing opinions, agreeing, disagreeing, and adding engagement.
Which is good pedagogy, right? Reinforces the learning.
Definitely. It shows the source's structured approach to reviewing the material and helping it stick.
And then immediately after the recap, it moves into a challenge task. This is interesting because it isn't just passive information delivery. The source is actively pushing the learner to use the material right away.
Absolutely. Step 1 of the challenge is pretty straightforward. Have a conversation where you express your opinion about a movie, a book, or any topic you care about. The implication here is crystal clear. Language learning, in the source's view, requires immediate application. It's not just theory, it's practice in real-world or simulated real-world contexts. Go out and actually talk to someone.
Use it or lose it, basically. Then step 2 focuses the application. Use at least one phrase to agree or disagree. Try to make your response more engaging and natural. This specifically directs the learner to move beyond their old, perhaps basic habits and intentionally integrate the new phrases and techniques they just learned from Day 7.
Yeah, it's about intentional practice of the specific skills just taught. Not just having a conversation, but practicing these specific things within that conversation.
And step 3 is arguably the most insightful part of the source's pedagogical design, I think. Reflect on your conversation. Ask yourself, did I sound confident? Which phrase worked best for me? What can I improve next time? This self-reflection component is crucial, isn't it?
It really is. It moves the learner from just performing the task, having the conversation, to becoming a metacognitive observer of their own performance, thinking about their thinking about their speaking.
Yes, the source isn't just giving you the tools, it's prompting you to evaluate how you use those tools and the impact they actually had. Did it work? Did you feel confident? This fosters self-awareness and helps guide future practice more effectively. It encourages the learner to essentially be their own teacher, identifying their own strengths and weaknesses based on real experience.
That's a really valuable part of the process. The source also includes a call for comments and interaction, asking questions like, what phrase did you use today? Did it help make the conversation easier? What's the hardest part of expressing opinions in English for you?
Ah, interesting.
This suggests the source is potentially part of a larger learning system or community that encourages sharing experiences, asking questions, and maybe collective problem solving, reinforcing the learning through social interaction potentially.
Makes sense. Finally, the source gives a brief preview of what's next, stating that Day 8 will be about storytelling.
Hmm.
This positions this expressing opinions lesson within a larger, structured curriculum aimed at building various conversational competencies. It shows how mastering these foundational elements, like expressing your views clearly and politely, maybe sets the stage for tackling more complex communication skills like narrating events or experiences effectively.
Yeah, it paints a picture of a comprehensive program moving step by step.
Wow. Okay. So bringing together all the points from our deep dive into this day7.pdf source, it provides a remarkably structured and, well, practical approach to moving beyond just the basic phrases when you're sharing your thoughts in English. It gives us very concrete alternative phrases for giving opinions, for agreeing, and for disagreeing.
And it doesn't stop there. As we saw, it strongly emphasizes the importance of supporting your opinions with reasons or details. It highlights using specific softening language and that clear structure when disagreeing to maintain politeness. And it encourages intentionally adding personality through things like introductory phrases or more evocative language to make your speech more engaging, more natural, maybe more like the native speakers it mentions.
For you, the listener, analyzing the source through our deep dive really offers a potential blueprint and some specific tools you can try out. Understanding the strategic function behind these different phrases, that this one adds nuance, that one signals politeness, this other one boosts engagement, that understanding can make your practice much more focused and hopefully more effective.
Yeah.
It's like a potential roadmap provided by the source itself for developing more fluent, confident, and natural conversational skills in English.
And just reflecting on the source's method itself, breaking down a complex skill like this into manageable parts, providing clear lists and examples, and crucially, integrating that active practice and self-reflection, it really feels like a very solid framework for anyone looking to build a new communication skill.
Definitely. The source places such a significant emphasis on how you express your opinion, particularly that detailed section on polite disagreement with its whole arsenal of softening phrases. This focus, highlighted so clearly within the source itself, raises an interesting final thought for you, the listener, to consider as you reflect on all this material we've discussed. The apparent necessity, according to this source, for so many specific phrases designed purely to politely navigate disagreement. What does that tell us, perhaps, about the social dynamics that are valued in English conversation? Or maybe about the particular challenges that learners face in balancing, say, directness with courtesy? It's something to ponder. And think about how actively practicing these specific politeness strategies, the ones outlined in the source, might not just change the words you use, but potentially change how comfortable or confident you actually feel participating in discussions where opinions might naturally differ. It could be quite empowering.
That's a very valuable perspective to carry forward from this analysis. Food for thought.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into expressing opinions in English, guided by the insights and examples found in day7.pdf.